Hi, I'm Alana. Welcome to another video. In today's video we are doing a get ready with me for church. So I don't usually do trigger warnings, but I just want to put a trigger warning on this video for themes of violence, discussions of violence and of sexual assault. So you have been warned. So I have noticed lately a steep rise in obscene content on the internet, like just on the open internet. You know, like I feel like these days when I am scrolling through reels and just like watching reels, more and more of the reels I am being served are shocking and horrifying and traumatizing. Like there used to be filters on the internet, you know? There used to be some kinds of filters and some kinds of standards and some kind of moderation, but I feel like all of that has kind of gone out the window a bit, because like, so these days when I'm scrolling through Instagram, I will see so many titties, like so many titties, and we used to have like specialized sites. You used to have to go to a special titties website if you wanted to see titties, but now like there is a lot more nudity. I have noticed there are so many titties, so many asses and titties just on Instagram, like the explore page, and that used to be something that you would have to go to like a specialized website to see, you know, like we used to have to go to special titty websites if we wanted to see titties, but now they're just everywhere. And like yesterday I was just like scrolling through reels and I clicked on this reel and it said, mum caught on film her son's fentanyl overdose. And I was like, what? Like, Jesus, I need some warning before the guttural howl of a grieving mother, right? Like, this should not be so easily available. And there is more and more of that kind of content, you know, like whether it's people filming homeless people who are clearly on drugs and clearly like struggling and out of their minds, or whether it's like violent murders, or like, it also makes me think that if this is the state of the open internet, like the general internet, then the state of the dark web must be so much worse. Like if there has been such a steep rise in obscene content in the open internet, then I can only begin to imagine how much worse it must be on the dark web, and that horrifies me. Yeah, like what is happening to people? You know, like I keep seeing videos, I keep being served videos of someone like in serious distress, like someone clearly like overdosing, or someone, you know, like being hit by a car, and like, why are these just available on Instagram, like on my explore page, you know? And I feel like we have become basically numb to pornography as a society. Like the kinds of content that are just available on your Instagram explore page, they're so much worse than they used to be. It is so much worse than it used to be. And so like these days when I'm scrolling through reels and just like trying to innocently watch reels, I will see things that I cannot unsee, you know? More and more so. More and more so. And also like if someone is overdosing in front of you, why are you filming them? You know? Besides that, what have I been listening to on Soft White Underbelly? So, the other night I listened to an interview with a victim of a skydiving accident. This man, he was only quite young, and he was a victim of a skydiving accident, and he talked about how he had just started skydiving like a year prior, and how he loved it and he was like addicted to it, and he went and like skydived this one time, and he had like I think 2 parachutes, and one of them like it didn't open, and then the 2 parachutes got like tangled up, and then he had no parachutes, and then he didn't obviously realize until like afterwards, like when he woke up from his coma, But he spoke about how he fell from like thousands of feet just down to the earth without a parachute or anything. And he got like seriously messed up, as you can imagine. He broke his jaw in several places, and he had to learn to walk again, and he had to learn to like eat again. And he broke 6 ribs, I think. Yeah, but he didn't know, like while he was falling, he didn't know that he didn't have his parachute. He was just kind of falling and like oblivious to it until he woke up from his coma. And then he was asking everyone like, wait, what happened? Why am I in hospital? And people were just like, oh, you were in an accident. And no one would tell him for ages like what happened. And he was like, what happened? And they wouldn't let him get up either, because like he wasn't allowed to walk because he was so messed up. And so he was like strapped to the bed, and he was like, wait, what happened? How did I get here? And everyone was like, you were in an accident. And then it actually took several days for someone to explain to him what actually happened, like how he was in a skydiving accident. And he said that they got it on video, but he hasn't watched the video yet because he couldn't bring himself to watch the video. So that was an interesting interview. And then I also listened to one interview with a skinhead called Donnie, and he had like his whole face was covered in tattoos, and he was actually very well spoken for a skinhead who is addicted to fentanyl, like surprisingly well spoken. So he was clearly raised well, I think, by his grandmother. But he spoke about how when he was younger he was in like a high-speed chase with the police, and he ended up crashing into another car, and he like hurt some civilians, and then he ended up in hospital, and he woke up from his coma, and he was paralyzed, so now he's in a wheelchair. And he said that that kind of like changed his life and like turned his life around a lot, because, well, he obviously went to prison after that, but he realized that like his actions have consequences. And he said that it was a really humbling experience for him, being put in a wheelchair and like losing the use of his legs. And when asked about the face tattoos, he said that is way too dark on my nose. He said that he got them when he was in prison, because he was in prison for 8 years, but he was 22 when he got sentenced to prison, so 8 years seemed like his whole life. And so someone was like, do you want to get face tattoos? And he was just like, sure thing. So he got about as many face tattoos as you can fit on your face. And he looked like a skinhead, but when he spoke, he was actually like a really beautiful person, like a really beautiful soul. And like I said, surprisingly well spoken for a skinhead who is addicted to fentanyl. So that interview was quite touching. But the interview that stayed with me most out of the ones that I've listened to recently was one with a girl called Serenity, and her whole life story was horrifying, like traumatizing. Like she watched her brother blow his brains out, like shoot himself in the head, and like her whole story was traumatizing. But I was particularly struck by, at the end, she was talking about, so she's a prostitute, and she's worked as a prostitute for many years, and she was talking about these men who the other prostitutes called them the Stranglers. And so these men, there would be like a Hispanic man who would pick her up, and then the first time it happened, he drove her out, like she was living in a park, and he picked her up for like sex, and he drove her out, like drove her way out to this warehouse. And then she got out of the car at the warehouse, and there were like 4 other Hispanic men, and all of the men raped her repeatedly and strangled her until she was about to pass out, and then they would stop, and then they would do it all again. And she was like begging them, like, please just take me back to the park. And so they all got in the car and they drove her back towards the park. And then when they were almost back at the park where she lived, they turned around and went back to the warehouse, and they all raped her again and they all strangled her again. And when they strangled her, they would strangle her until she was just about to pass out, and then they would stop. And she said that these men picked her up and did this on 4 separate occasions, and it was hard to tell like which men were associated with these men, so you wouldn't be able to know like who you were getting into the car with and like whether they were one of the stranglers. So she said that this happened on 4 separate occasions, and then eventually one time they picked her up and they like raped her and strangled her, and then they put her in the boot of a car and they left her there for 3 days, and she was like urinating on herself and stuff like that because she was just like in the boot of a car, like alone with nothing. And then after 3 days, the boot of the car like popped open, and she looked out to see if anyone was around, and eventually she got the courage to like crawl out of the boot, and she looked around and there was no one in the car and there was no one anywhere, and she was just like in the middle of a desert, like abandoned in the middle of a desert. And so then she started walking and running, obviously, to safety, and she eventually got to a road, and a car stopped and picked her up, and the man in the car said, "Oh, so you're one of the lucky ones?" And she was like, "What do you mean?" And then he told her this story about how these men, they were human traffickers, and what they would do is they would like sell these girls into sex slavery in Mexico, and when they sold them, if the deal didn't go through, then they would just like abandon them and leave them in the trunk of a car in the desert. And he said that they found like heaps of women's bodies in the trunks of cars, and so that was why she was one of the lucky ones. And yeah, so that story in particular stayed with me because like I guess it's just a particularly horrifying thing to do, like, and very intentional also, like strangling someone until they almost pass out, and then like the fact that they went to drive her back to the park where she lived and then turned around and went back and did it all over again. And like that poor girl, like that poor woman. So that story was particularly horrifying. I also listened to one with 2 younger prostitutes. One was 17 and the other one was 22. And they said that they basically like they live in a motel and they just work like all day, just like out in the street, like just standing on Skid Row waiting for someone to pick you up for sex. And these girls were so young, like they were 17 and 22. And they talked about how like sometimes men will offer like, "Is there anything you'll do for $60? And she was like, "That's ridiculous. Like, I'm not a cheap hoe." So she was talking about how, you know, like their room costs $150. So you need to pay at least like $300 or something for sex, which still seems like so little, right? Like these poor little girls, like little girls. And I thought about them like living in this motel alone and like no one to protect them. And then Mark asked them like, "Do you believe in love?" And they both said no. One of the girls said, "We don't have enough heart left for that. Like, no, we don't believe in love." So that was particularly heartbreaking. So thank you for getting ready with me for church today. You're beautiful. You're perfect. I love you. God bless you. If you're new, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel.